Explaining the book, Rethink, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know by Adam Grant. And I will analyze each chapter in detail, mentioning all the stories and examples, and explaining in depth the ideas discussed in the book. Introduction to the book. Why is rethinking important? Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist and professor at Wharton University, begins the book with a main idea. Success in life depends not only on what we know, but on how well we can rethink what we know. We live in a rapidly changing world, yet many people cling to their beliefs as if they were absolute truths. This leads to many problems, both on a personal and societal level. Grant explains that we often fall into the knowledge trap, where we think we know something when in fact we may be wrong or have incomplete knowledge. Allegory, the firefighter who defied the rules and survived. Grant begins the book with a tragic but deeply meaningful story. In a forest fire, firefighters had to make a quick decision to save themselves. According to conventional training, they were supposed to run away from the flames, but one of them, Wag Dodge, realized that the fire was going to catch up with them. Instead of running, he set a fire in the grass in front of him, stood in the burning space, and survived, while most of his colleagues died. The lesson here is, sometimes what you think is absolutely right can be wrong, and rethinking can save your life. Part 1. Thinking like a scientist. Chapter 1. Beware the mentality of the priest, the prosecutor, and the politician. Grant explains 3 thinking patterns that prevent us from reconsidering our opinions. 1. The preacher. When we take a certain position and we start defending it as if it were a sacred doctrine, we don't think about whether our opinion is wrong, we just try to convince others that it is right. 2. The prosecutor. When we try to win arguments instead of seeking the truth, we look for weaknesses in other people's opinions, but rarely question our own. 3. The politician. When we change our opinions just to please others or gain popularity, rather than based on evidence. The solution? Adopt a scientist mindset. We should treat our opinions as scientific hypotheses, constantly testing them and updating them as new evidence emerges. Scientists don't stick to their first results. They always retest and retest. Example from the book. Grant tells the story of a successful businessman who thought his company's strategy was perfect. But when he listened to his employees and began testing his hypotheses, he discovered fundamental errors and corrected them. Chapter 2. When to stick to your opinions and when to change them. Many people think that changing your opinion is a sign of weakness, but Grant sees the opposite. The strongest people are those who have the courage to update their opinions when new evidence comes to light. The concept of intellectual humility. Being able to admit that you might be wrong. Instead of bragging about how much you know, brag about how much you are willing to learn. The story of John Stuart Mill. The famous philosopher John Stuart Mill forced himself to read opinions that contradicted his own constantly. He believed that the best way to develop your thinking is to challenge it regularly. Chapter 3. The Art of Reverse Thinking. One of the most important tools for rethinking is counterfactual thinking. Instead of trying to convince someone that their opinion is wrong, get them to think about alternative scenarios for themselves. The story of Daryl Davis and the black musician who convinced racist extremists to abandon their views. Davis didn't try to attack their ideas, but rather asked them questions that made them doubt themselves. The result? More than 200 members of the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, resigned from the racist organization. Section 2. Influencing others to rethink. Chapter 4. Why do people refuse to admit they're wrong? Grant explains the Dunning-Kruger effect, the tendency for less informed people to be overconfident in their opinions, while smarter people are more self-doubting. A great story. He tells the story of a student who believed the earth was flat. Instead of forcing him to change his mind, Grant asked him to conduct an experiment himself. The student did the research and slowly began to change his mind without feeling attacked. Chapter 5. How to convince others to rethink. When discussing with others, avoid 1. Direct attacks. This leads to defensiveness. 2. Overwhelming them with evidence. This makes them more entrenched in their opinion. Instead, use the Socratic approach. Ask them questions that make them question themselves. Example: Grant tells the story of a political consultant who successfully changed voters' minds on sensitive issues by simply asking questions instead of arguing. Part 3. Building a culture of rethinking. Chapter 6. How do we create an environment that promotes critical thinking? We should surround ourselves with people who make us think differently. In companies, employees should be encouraged to challenge decisions, not just follow them. Example: Nokia refused to listen to engineers who warned about the dangers of Apple, leading to its failure. Chapter 7. Rethinking how we teach new generations. Education shouldn't be about memorizing information. It should be about teaching kids how to think critically. Grant suggests giving students tasks to challenge their opinions instead of just giving them information. Conclusion: how do we make rethinking a daily habit? Challenge yourself regularly. Ask yourself, when was the last time you changed an important opinion? Seek out people who don't always agree with you because they help you grow. Don't be afraid of doubt. Doubt is not a weakness, it's a strength that makes you think more deeply. I will present to you some of the most important stories mentioned in the book. Rethink: The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know by Adam Grant, with detailed details and in-depth analysis of each story and its lessons learned. 1. Wag Dodge and the firefighters who didn't rethink. Background: how did the disaster start? In 1949, in the Mangalese forest area of Montana, USA, a huge forest fire broke out. A team of 15 firefighters was sent to fight the fire. Their leader, Wag Dodge, had long experience in dealing with forest fires. When they arrived, they noticed that the winds began to change, causing the fire to burn faster than they expected. The decisive moment, making the fateful decision. Suddenly, Dodge realized that the fire was moving at an incredible speed, faster than they could run. The firefighters started running at full speed, but Dodge saw that running away would not be enough. Here's where the thinking came in. Firefighters had traditionally been trained. When you see fire, run. But Dodge rethought his strategy and asked himself, why don't I just light a small fire in front of me? The idea: if the grass near him burned, there would be nothing left for the next fire to catch. The execution: the decision that saved Dodge's life. Dodge lit a very small fire in front of him, allowing it to burn the grass in a circle around him. When the huge fire arrived, Dodge was standing in the middle of an already burning area, so the fire couldn't find any fuel to continue burning. The result: Dodge survived while 13 of his colleagues who kept running died. The lesson learned: sometimes sticking to traditional practices can be deadly. Rethinking can save your life. Flexibility in thinking is a critical skill in dealing with crises. 2. Daryl Davis and the black musician who convinced the KKK to give up hate. Who is Daryl Davis? Daryl Davis is a black American musician who lived in the United States during a time when racism was rampant. He had a strange curiosity. Why do some people hate people based solely on the color of their skin? How did he start a dialogue with the KKK members? Instead of avoiding or attacking white supremacists, he decided to meet them face to face. He met a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, a racist extremist organization. The dialogue began in an unexpected way, as he asked the man directly, "How can you hate me without knowing me?" Psychological impact. How did he change their hearts? Daryl didn't tell the man, "You're wrong," but rather made him think for himself. He asked him intelligent questions, such as, "Have you ever met a black person other than me? What if you're the one who's wrong?" Slowly, the man began to question his beliefs and eventually left the racist organization. The result? Over 200 people resigned from the KKK. Over the years, Daryl continued to meet with more members of the group. He used the same approach, asking questions instead of attacking. The result? Over 200 people resigned from the Ku Klux Klan and gave up their hatred. The lesson learned: you can't force people to change their minds, but you can help them rethink it themselves. Open dialogue is more powerful than direct arguments and attacks. Questions are a powerful tool for bringing about real change. 3. Experiment to change voters' minds in just 10 minutes. Scientific experiment. How to change someone's mind quickly. In a scientific study, researchers tried to change voters' minds on the subject of gay marriage. Instead of telling them they were wrong, they used the Socratic approach. 1. They asked them to imagine a personal situation similar to the situation. 2. They asked voters questions that made them think about the situation from a new angle. 3. After just 10 minutes, some voters started to rethink their opinions. A powerful example. There was a man who was completely against the idea of gay marriage. The researcher asked him, "Do you have someone close to you who has faced discrimination because of their identity?" The man thought about a friend who had faced discrimination because of their religion. Suddenly, he began to realize that he had been against discrimination in other situations. So why couldn't it be the same here? He began to question his previous position and came away from the experiment with a more open mind. Lesson learned. The way you frame a discussion can change its outcome entirely. Personal stories and experiences are more powerful than numbers and statistics in changing minds. 4. Why did Nokia fail? The story of not rethinking its strategy. Nokia was the king of phones, until it wasn't. In the early 2000s, Nokia was the largest phone company in the world. When the iPhone came out in 2007, some engineers inside Nokia were warning management that feature phones wouldn't last. But the top management refused to listen. Why didn't the management listen? They believed that Nokia couldn't fail. They were convinced that smartphones were just a fad. They weren't willing to rethink their strategy. The result? A resounding collapse. In a few years, Nokia almost disappeared from the phone market. Companies that rethought the future of phones, such as Apple and Samsung, took over the market entirely. Lesson learned. If you don't rethink your decisions regularly, you may fail even if you are successful today. Gil, listening to new opinions and not clinging to the past is the key to continued success. Conclusion. What can we learn from these stories? 1. Rethinking is not a weakness. It is a sign of true intelligence. 2. Powerful questions are more powerful than direct arguments in changing minds. 3. Even giant companies can collapse if they don't rethink their strategies. 4. Intellectual humility is the key to personal and professional development.